Hello and welcome to the third in our series of webinars on the 5 steps to supply chain success with Rob Krellin and Joe Prosser, supply chain consultants at Slimstock. In this webinar, we're going to be looking at the importance of validating the demand forecast with partners outside of the supply chain team. The objective of validating the demand forecast is to reach a consensus on what the business realistically expects to sell. The result of this process will then be released to the supply and operations teams in order to gain their feedback on the feasibility of achieving the plan. We'll turn our attention to this flow in our next webinar, so please look out for this. If our objective is to gain consensus on the forecast, let's start by briefly looking at the definition of a forecast. A forecast is a calculation or estimate of future events. Forecasts are important because they help us to anticipate required actions. So in business, a sales forecast will enable us to plan our production, determine what we need to purchase, organize our warehouse resource and our transport to ensure the customer receives the right product at the right location at the right time. Forecasts are also important because they help us create the financial budget. Forecasts are also needed by other departments such as human resources, as this will enable them to determine whether additional recruitment is needed to fulfill the forecast. The marketing department can use existing forecasts to help focus where to plan their activities. Are there product groups or categories that need extra attention?
Forecasts are generally derived from the analysis of past observations across defined time buckets. Such methods are known as time series models. These forecasts are being made all the time in everyday life. In their most basic form, a forecaster calculates averages from past observations and uses this as the prediction for the next event.
Consider how you decide what time to leave for work in the morning. If you know that on average it takes 20 minutes to drive the 8 miles to the office and then 5 minutes to park, you would try to leave the house at least 25 minutes before your workday begins. However, during the school holidays, you may have noticed that there are less cars on the road, so the journey is shorter. Alternatively, in the winter, when your windscreen is covered with ice and you spend extra time scraping a peephole with a CD case, it's probably going to delay you by at least 5 minutes. These increases or decreases to the journey time for specific periods would indicate seasonality in the data.
Forecasting methods range from taking crude averages, as in our example of journey times, to weighted averages, and then to more complex models such as single exponential smoothing, double exponential smoothing when there is also an underlying trend, which could be positive or negative, and then even to triple exponential smoothing, where there could be the additional variable of seasonality to take into account.
In the world of inventory management, specialist software is designed to calculate forecasts using best fit methods for thousands of products in a matter of seconds. Obviously, computation provides massive efficiencies compared to human forecasters. When historical data is available, it's generally preferable to use statistical methods to generate the base forecast compared to using only judgmental techniques or gut feel. However, as we will see, there is still a valuable place for human intervention in forecasting.
Given that forecasts are just estimates, even those based on complex models are prone to error. For this reason, it can be advantageous to validate the statistical forecast and ensure that it is enriched with any data unknown to the model. Let's look at some examples where the available data alone may not provide the best forecast possible.
The sports industry is big business, and therefore substantial financial rewards or losses hinge on the trading of players. In the early 2000s, baseball went through the Moneyball revolution, where teams started to incorporate more data analysis into their scouting methods. The objective was to find players that may have been undervalued when assessed primarily through traditional scouting techniques and gut feel. The method proved to be very successful for the innovators and early adopters, especially for the Oakland A's, who finished as American League West champions in 2002 after a record 20-game winning streak, despite having one of the lowest budgets in the major leagues. This example clearly shows the benefits of statistical forecasting where the role of data analysis may have previously been limited.
Fantasy football is now a familiar game to many people, where colleagues and friends can pit their wits against each other, trying to build a team of world beaters on a limited budget. With the knowledge of Moneyball techniques, you may think that a spreadsheet is all that you need to win the bragging rights. However, we should bear in mind that stats sometimes miss the signals that human judgment is better placed to interpret. Consider a football player with exceptional statistics. Data models may predict continued success for this player when moving to a new team, whereas human judgment may be better placed to assess how the player would adapt to moving to a new location and climate, working with a new manager, or even learning a new language. Human judgment may be also better placed to assess the mental attitude of the player and how they will react when eventually they start to see a dip in their form. Some players will eventually come back stronger. Others, unsure how to deal with the failure, may not recover to the same heights. Football has countless examples of big money transfers gone wrong, when the player's stats to that point would have indicated nothing but success. The point here is that forecasts should be at their best when statistical analysis is combined with judgmental forecasting.
In the 2016-17 Premier League football season, Leicester City Football Club pulled off one of the most remarkable feats in the history of the English game, when they won the Premier League title. This was the first time the club had won the title in their history and was against all the odds. The bookmakers only gave Leicester 5,000 to 1 odds to win the title and were in fact favourites to be relegated out of the Premier League. How wrong the bookmakers were as they went on to record their largest ever payout, £25 million. It's questionable whether the bookmakers may have missed some non-statistical signals which may have given them reason to be less confident of Leicester's failure.
Over the last 40 years, the music industry has seen some fundamental changes in the way the public accesses recorded content. Vinyl sales were eroded by cassettes, which were then superseded by CDs, and in the early 2000s, MP3 content quickly gained market share. The far-sighted managers in the music industry saw that diversification into providing downloadable content would be necessary to maintain sales, whereas other retailers were arguably slower to integrate this market knowledge. When looking purely at sales data until the early 2000s, forecasters at HMV perhaps could have been forgiven for not seeing the change in culture in the music industry. Yet clearly the integration of qualitative methods may have been beneficial in predicting a new balance between physical content and downloadable content, and thus better preparing for the downturn that arrived.
Let's recap on what we've discussed so far. Statistical forecasts can be highly efficient and often provide a superior base forecast to judgmental methods alone. Yet we know that forecasts are prone to error and that the past doesn't always provide a faultless view of the future when there is information unknown to the forecast model. When creating a sales forecast, more accurate results can often be gained by ensuring that those with market knowledge, such as salespeople, marketers, and product managers, are able to contribute market intelligence to the forecasting process and validate the statistical forecasts. Market intelligence factors can both positively and negatively influence the demand forecast. Let's take a look at some of these factors in more detail.
Promotions are special events aimed at increasing sales above the expected base rate for a specific period. As promotions are often held in different periods each year and with different conditions each time, using statistical forecasting alone will miss important information. In order to improve the quality of the forecast, marketing and salespeople need to consider the expected incremental volume from the activity. It's important to know what quantity is expected to be sold above the base forecast, the products or product families involved, the timing of the activity at the customer, and therefore when is stock required at your DC. And finally, is there sufficient lead time to buy in or manufacture the stock, or is it already in place?
Salespeople are in the pursuit of winning new customers. When this all goes to plan, we face a situation where we must anticipate the expected uplift to our overall demand. Salespeople are therefore integral to the process of ensuring that demand planners receive timely notification of any necessary changes to the forecasts. Again, we need to know the products concerned and the incremental change to the forecast. It's also important to determine whether the customer will require pipe fill stock for the first weeks and months, and whether this will be greater than their usual base rate.
When things aren't going quite so well, we unfortunately lose customers. For this scenario, we have demand history for this customer, which enters into our forecast process. But without notification that this information is now irrelevant, we risk over-ordering. And so it's important that sales, marketing and supply chain work closely together to analyze which products or product categories are involved, ideally ring-fencing the customer's sales history and excluding it from the forecast calculation. We may also need to consider if there are any contractual obligations to supply the customer to an agreed end date or continue to hold spares or warranty parts for them.
In addition to promotional activity in the forms of discounts and deals, we often see other marketing activities that have a positive effect on sales. These can include product improvements such as refreshed packaging or improved performance, website or digital activity to increase product reach, or product demonstrations.
Other common factors that lead to changes in the demand pattern are increased or decreased competition in the market. If new companies begin to gain market share, we may need to decrease our sales forecast. Alternatively, if a competitor has supply issues or drops out of the market completely, new customers may be gained as a result. Changes to regulation can also have an impact on sales due to certain purchases becoming more or less attractive. Take for example the smoking ban in public places, which came into force a number of years ago in the UK. As a result of smoking being banned from pubs and restaurants and having to be limited to particular smoking zones, there was a positive effect on sales of certain products. For example, external heaters to keep the smokers warm outside, pubs having to replace old carpets and furniture where previously the smoke smell screened their true poor condition, smoking shelters, and of course external ashtrays. Statistical forecasts would not have predicted the significant increase in demand that arose on these products, and therefore market intelligence would have needed to be applied to predict the new demand.
We've seen that there are a lot of judgmental or market intelligence factors to consider when enriching your baseline forecast. Additionally, there are many different departments involved. As we mentioned earlier, one of the objectives is to reach a consensus forecast. So how do you achieve this consensus forecast without the process descending into chaos?
To achieve this, you need to have a structured process in place with clear roles and responsibilities that culminates in the consensual sign-off of the unconstrained sales forecast. Typically, this may be carried out during a monthly meeting with representatives from the key departments. Depending on the size of the business, some roles may be combined. For example, you may not have a designated person specifically for the S&OP lead.
Let's take a look at a typical demand validation process. In advance of the meeting, the demand planning team can issue the demand forecast to the sales and marketing team via a spreadsheet or a report. The sales and marketing team review the base forecast and enrich it with market intelligence.
The adjusted forecast is then valued and compared versus the original forecast. This is typically done between both the demand planner and the sales and marketing team just ahead of the meeting. Then during the monthly meeting itself, the adjusted forecast is reviewed by all parties, reasons provided for any significant increases or decreases, and finally the forecast is signed off. And then the final stage is to deploy the adjusted forecast into the live system and produce a summary of the adjustments that have been made to the supply and operational teams.
Demand validation is just one step in a wider sales and operations planning flow. In the next webinar, we'll be looking at what the sales and operations teams do with the validated, unconstrained sales forecast. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you have found the webinar useful.